For the longest time, I believed my life was something others could only dream of. I had the wife, the home, the steady career, and a son who was the center of our world. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was close enough. We were the kind of couple that people called perfect, the kind that made others envious. Or at least, that's what I thought. My wife, Emily, was beautiful in a way that felt effortless. She had this warmth about her, the kind that made people feel welcome. She was a devoted mother and, as far as I knew, a loving wife. We had been together for over a decade, growing from broke newlyweds in a cramped apartment to successful homeowners in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes until sunset and neighbors exchanged pleasantries at the mailbox. Safe, comfortable, familiar. Our son, Jason, was 10, bright, curious, and too observant for his own good. He was at the age where he still adored his parents, but had started to notice things adults wished they could hide. I never imagined that his sharp eyes would be the ones to shatter my carefully constructed reality. Emily and I had built a life together from scratch. When we bought our house, it was a fixer-upper, and we poured our hearts into making it a home. Every coat of paint, every repaired floorboard was a testament to our commitment to each other. Our wedding photo sat in a silver frame on the living room mantel. In it, we were young, smiling, unaware of the years that lay ahead, the good, the bad, and the devastating. Things hadn't always been easy. We had our share of struggles. Money was tight in the early years, and later, parenthood tested us in ways we never anticipated. But we endured. We fought for each other. That's what love was, wasn't it? Choosing each other every day, no matter what. Lately, though, something had changed. The warmth in our home felt thinner, stretched, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. It was subtle at first. Emily's distant smiles, her habit of turning away when I reached for her. She was still present, still fulfilled her role as wife and mother, but there was something missing. The connection we once had was fading, and I found myself reaching for something that was no longer there. I chalked it up to stress. Work had been demanding for both of us, and parenthood was exhausting in ways that never really let up. I told myself we were just in a rough patch, that marriages went through cycles. But deep down, I felt something I couldn't name yet. Something hollow, something wrong. The problem with blind trust is that you never see the fall coming. Looking back, the signs had been there for months, subtle yet persistent, like a slow leak that only becomes noticeable when the damage is beyond repair. At first, they were easy to ignore, easy to dismiss as byproducts of a stressful life, of the responsibilities that come with raising a child and maintaining a career. But now, in hindsight, I see them for what they really were, the warning signs of a marriage unraveling before my eyes. Emily had always been predictable in her habits, a woman of routine who found comfort in the structure of daily life. She was never one to obsess over her phone, often leaving it lying around the house without a second thought. But that changed. I remember the first time I noticed it, one evening after dinner, as I walked past her on the couch. I saw how quickly she turned the screen away from me, her body shifting slightly as if shielding something from view. At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing, a reflex, an unconscious movement. But soon, it became a pattern. The phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter or the nightstand, was now constantly in her hand or tucked away in her pocket. She started sleeping with it under her pillow, something she never used to do, claiming it was just easier that way in case she needed to check messages late at night. When I asked her why she suddenly had so many late-night messages, she sighed as if my question exhausted her, dismissing it with a vague response about work, about deadlines, about clients in different time zones needing immediate attention. Then there were the late nights at the office. Emily had never been the type to bring work home with her, much less stay after hours unless absolutely necessary. But suddenly, those late nights became more frequent, her excuses more rehearsed, as if she had anticipated my questions before I even had a chance to ask them. She assured me it was nothing to worry about, that she was simply trying to get ahead, to prove herself, to provide for our family. And I wanted to believe her. I told myself that she was just being ambitious, that she was working hard for us, for our future. But deep down, I knew something was off. She started coming home later and later, and when she finally walked through the door, Something about her felt different, like she had been somewhere she didn't belong. I could smell it on her, not perfume or cologne, but a scent that was unfamiliar, something that didn't belong in our home. When I kissed her hello, she turned her face just slightly, so that my lips landed on her cheek instead of her mouth. It was subtle, but I felt it, the distance, the careful avoidance. And still, I convinced myself that it was nothing, that I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into every small detail. Even in bed, the shift was undeniable. The intimacy between us, once effortless, had become rare, mechanical, something that happened less and less until it stopped altogether. She was always too tired, too busy, too distracted. I told myself this was normal, that all marriages went through phases, that it was just a temporary rut we would eventually climb out of. I buried my doubts beneath logic and reason, clinging to the hope that this was just another rough patch, one we would overcome together. But Jason saw it too. One night, as we sat at the dinner table without Emily, he looked up from his plate and asked me why she was always working late. His voice was small, uncertain, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled me, something that told me he had been paying attention more than I realized. I forced a smile, told him that his mother was just very busy, that she was working hard, that everything was fine. He nodded but didn't look convinced. I should have known then that if a 10-year-old could sense the change, it wasn't just in my head. That night, after Jason had gone to bed and Emily was still at work, or wherever she was, I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, staring at nothing, listening to the distant hum of the refrigerator. My mind drifted back to the early years of our marriage, to the late-night talks, the shared laughter, the way she used to look at me with something I could only describe as adoration. I thought about the life we had built together, the home we had poured our hearts into, the memories we had created. And then, for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the thought I had been avoiding for weeks. What if she was lying? I felt a slow, sinking dread settle in my chest, but I pushed it away just as quickly as it came. I wasn't ready to face that possibility. Not yet. Denial is a strange thing. It lets you cling to illusions even when the truth is staring you in the face. I told myself that Emily was just tired, that she was just stressed, that maybe I was overanalyzing things because of my own insecurities. But the problem with ignoring the signs is that they don't go away, they only become harder to ignore. Her detachment grew more obvious as the days passed. Conversations that once felt effortless now felt forced, as if she was just going through the motions. She was physically present but emotionally absent, her attention always elsewhere. It was the little things, the way she barely acknowledged me when I spoke, the way she avoided eye contact, the way she sighed whenever I asked her how her day had been. She wasn't just distant. She was disconnected, as if some invisible wall had been placed between us and she had no interest in tearing it down. Jason saw it too. He didn't say much about it, but I could tell. He would watch her with careful eyes, noticing the same things I did, but without the words to describe them. He would linger by her side, waiting for attention that never came, asking innocent questions about her day only to receive half-hearted responses. A child knows when something is wrong, even if they don't understand what it is. And yet, I still told myself that this was temporary, that whatever was weighing on Emily would pass, that one day I would wake up and things would go back to normal. But normal was gone. One evening, as I sat in the living room waiting for Emily to come home, I realized I had no idea where she really was. She had texted earlier, saying she had to work late again, the same excuse she had been using for weeks. But there was no proof, no way to verify if she was telling the truth. I wanted to trust her. I had always trusted her. But something deep inside me whispered that trust alone wasn't enough anymore. I needed to know. I pulled out my phone, hesitating for only a moment before calling her office. A woman answered, her voice polite but surprised when I asked for Emily. She told me Emily had left hours ago, that there was no late-night meeting, no last-minute project. My stomach dropped, a cold wave of realization washing over me as I thanked her and hung up. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me at once. I had been lying to myself, convincing myself that things were fine when they clearly weren't. The pieces were falling into place, and I was no longer in control of how they fit together. Emily came home an hour later, slipping through the door with the same casual ease as always. She smiled, kissed Jason goodnight, and made her way to our bedroom as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But I knew now that something had been happening behind my back, that the woman I had built a life with was keeping secrets I could no longer ignore. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing. I had never felt more alone. The realization that my marriage was unraveling wasn't just painful, it was suffocating. The trust, the love, the certainty I had once felt were gone, replaced by a sinking dread that only grew heavier with each passing second. I didn't know how deep the betrayal ran, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Emily had been hiding, I was going to find out. Doubt had taken root in my mind, and no matter how much I tried to push it aside, it refused to leave. It had been weeks since I first noticed Emily's distance, since the excuses started piling up, since the warmth in our home had been replaced by something colder, something unspoken. Now, with the undeniable proof that she had lied about working late, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I had spent years trusting her without question, never once considering that she was capable of betraying me. But trust, once broken, is impossible to repair without answers. And I needed answers. That night, as Emily slept beside me, I made my decision. I wasn't going to ask her outright. People like her, people who cheat, don't confess unless they're forced to. She would lie, manipulate, twist the truth until I was made to feel like the irrational one. No, I needed evidence. I needed something undeniable, something she couldn't talk her way out of. The next day, while she was at work, or wherever she really was, I started looking for clues. I checked our phone records first. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the call logs, scanning for unfamiliar numbers. And there it was, a single number, repeated over and over again. Late at night, early in the morning, even during the hours when she was supposed to be at work, my stomach twisted into knots. I dialed the number with a pounding heart, barely able to breathe as the phone rang. It went straight to voicemail. No name, just a generic message. I hung up, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of confirmation settle over me. There was someone else. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't paranoid. My wife, the woman I had built a life with, was having an affair. I wasn't reckless. I knew that if I confronted her now, she would deny everything, gaslight me into thinking I was wrong. So I waited. I watched. I paid attention to every detail. I noticed how she would leave the room to take certain calls, how she suddenly had a new interest in her appearance, how she became defensive whenever I asked simple questions. And the worst part? She was careful. Too careful. She didn't leave messages. She deleted her call history. But she had made one mistake. Jason, our son, had been watching just as closely as I had, though he didn't understand what he was seeing. One night, as I helped him with his homework, he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He told me that Mommy had a new friend who sometimes came to visit when I wasn't home. He said he saw them talking in the kitchen once, that they were laughing, that they seemed really happy together. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't understand. But I did. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm, to act as if his words hadn't just shattered what little hope I had left. I thanked him for telling me and sent him off to bed. And then, for the first time in my life, I felt something I never thought I'd feel toward my own wife: rage. It wasn't just that she had betrayed me. It was that she had brought her affair into our home, into the place we had built together, into the space where our son lived and played and trusted her without question. She hadn't just disrespected me, she had disrespected us. And for that, there would be consequences. I wasn't going to act on emotion. I wasn't going to storm into the bedroom and demand answers. No, that was what she would expect, and she had likely prepared for it. Instead, I was going to be patient. I was going to wait for the perfect moment. Because if she thought she had fooled me, if she thought she had gotten away with this, she was wrong. She had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated me. And soon, she was going to regret it. I was done pretending. The truth was out in the open, at least for me, even if Emily still thought she was getting away with it. The moment Jason unknowingly confirmed my worst suspicions, something inside me hardened. I felt no sadness, no longing to repair what was already beyond saving. There was only a quiet, simmering rage, a sense of inevitability, and the absolute certainty that she would not walk away from this unscathed. But rage without control is useless. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation, twist the narrative, or make me look like the fool. No, I needed undeniable proof. I needed to corner her so completely that there would be no room for lies, no space for denial. And once I had it, I would burn everything we had to the ground and let her watch as it turned to ash. I started with the basics. If she was bringing him here, into my home, I needed to know exactly when and how often. So I bought a small, motion-activated camera, discreet, easy to hide, the kind designed for security surveillance. I placed it in the living room, angled perfectly toward the front door and the hallway leading to our bedroom. If he was stepping foot in my house, I would see it. I made sure to set it up when Emily was at work, taking every precaution to ensure she wouldn't suspect a thing. Then, I changed my routine. I started leaving work early without telling her. Some days, I'd go straight home, parking a block away and watching the house from a distance. Other days, I'd say I had a meeting and instead sit in my car near her office, waiting to see if she was actually there. More often than not, she wasn't. Instead, she was elsewhere. Always careful, always covering her tracks, but not careful enough. A pattern began to emerge. She wasn't just sneaking around on random nights. There were specific days when she was late, when she came home smelling like something unfamiliar, when she barely looked me in the eyes. And the more I watched, the more the rage inside me grew. Then came the night everything fell into place. I had told her I'd be working late, an excuse she had used on me countless times, and she barely reacted, barely looked up from her phone when I said I wouldn't be home until after 10. She kissed Jason goodnight, then went about her usual routine, acting as if everything was normal, but I knew better. Instead of going to work, I parked a few blocks away from our house, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I waited. Time moved agonizingly slow, every second stretching into eternity. I checked my phone, refreshing the camera feed every few minutes, my stomach tightening with every moment of silence. Then, just after 9, movement. A car pulled up to my house, our house, and a man stepped out. I didn't recognize him at first, but then I saw the way Emily greeted him at the door, the way she smiled, the way she placed her hands on his chest as he stepped inside. It was intimate, familiar, as if he belonged there. My vision blurred with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. I watched as they disappeared inside, as the door closed behind them, sealing me out of the life I had once believed was mine. I refreshed the camera feed again, and there they were, in my living room, laughing, whispering. He leaned in, kissed her, and she kissed him back without hesitation. My wife, the woman I had spent years building a life with, was standing in my home with another man, betraying me without a second thought. I could have stormed in right then, could have ripped him apart, could have demanded answers. But that would have been too easy, too merciful. Instead, I hit record. Emily had no idea what was coming, and soon, she would wish she had never made me the fool. Sitting in my car, I watched the live feed from the hidden camera, my grip tightening around my phone as I forced myself to endure every second of what unfolded inside my home. Emily moved with an ease that told me this wasn't the first time. She greeted him at the door with a smile, that same smile that had once been reserved for me, and led him inside as if he belonged there. They settled onto the couch, their bodies naturally gravitating toward each other, an intimacy that made my stomach turn. I watched as he reached for her, his hand resting on her thigh like it was second nature, like he had done it 100 times before. And then, the kiss. Slow at first, then deepening, her fingers running through his hair, his hands traveling over the body that I had once thought was mine alone. The cold weight of realization settled into my chest. I had known, of course. The late nights, the lies, the distance between us. It had all been leading to this moment. But knowing and seeing were two different things, and now that I had witnessed it with my own eyes, there was no turning back. The life I had built, the love I had given, had all been wasted on a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her pleasure. I could have stormed in right then, let my anger take over, torn apart the illusion she had been maintaining for so long. But that would have been too easy, too impulsive, and I wanted something more. I wanted control. So instead, I sat there, letting the rage simmer just beneath the surface, letting the betrayal settle into my bones. I recorded everything, saving the footage in multiple locations, ensuring that no matter what Emily tried to do, she wouldn't be able to deny the truth. Then, I drove away, not because I was retreating, but because I needed to plan my next move. The next morning, Emily acted as if nothing had changed. She greeted Jason with a warm smile, packed his lunch, kissed his forehead, and went about her usual routine like the devoted mother and wife she pretended to be. But I watched her differently now, with cold calculation instead of affection. Every word she spoke, every movement she made, felt like a performance, a carefully constructed lie. She glanced at me only briefly, her expression unreadable, but I could feel the weight of her deception in every interaction. Did she feel guilty? Did she regret what she had done? I doubted it. She had been doing this for weeks, maybe months, right under my nose. If guilt had ever been a factor, she had long since buried it. I spent the next few days securing my position. I met with a lawyer, gathering everything I needed to make sure she had no claim to my home, my assets, or my future. The house was in my name, the finances were under my control, and once I had the evidence compiled, there would be no legal ground for her to stand on. I secured copies of the footage, backing it up in multiple locations. I left nothing to chance. I wasn't going to let her twist the story, wasn't going to give her the opportunity to manipulate her way out of the consequences she had so willingly invited upon herself. Then, I set the final stage. I arranged for Jason to stay at a friend's house over the weekend, ensuring that he would be far away from what was about to happen. He was innocent in all of this, and I wouldn't let him be caught in the crossfire. That Friday evening, I told Emily I'd be working late, mirroring the same lie she had fed me countless times. She barely reacted, barely acknowledged my words as she tapped away at her phone, likely making arrangements for her lover to come over the moment she thought I was gone. I left the house, but I didn't go far. I parked a few blocks away, watching, waiting, and just as I expected, he arrived. This time, I didn't just record it from a distance. I let them settle in, let them get comfortable, let them believe they were safe in their little fantasy. I waited long enough to know they had crossed the line once again, long enough to ensure there was no room for doubt. Then, with the cold certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose, I drove home. My hands were steady as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet except for the low hum of conversation coming from the bedroom we had shared, the space that was supposed to belong to us alone. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps slow, deliberate, each step stripping away the last remnants of the man who had once trusted his wife beyond reason. I didn't hesitate as I reached the door, didn't pause to gather my thoughts or steel my resolve. I pushed it open, stepping into the room where my life had been shattered. Emily screamed, the sound sharp and panicked as she scrambled to cover herself, her body twisting away in a pathetic attempt at modesty. Her lover, the intruder, froze, his face pale, his body rigid with shock. The air was thick with the stink of their betrayal, their guilt hanging heavy between us. I stood there, watching as the reality of the situation sank into them, as they realized that their game was over. Neither of them spoke, neither of them moved, both too stunned to react. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and hit play. The room filled with the sound of their voices, their laughter, their infidelity. Emily's face drained of color as she listened to the evidence of her own actions, to the proof of what she had done. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but I wasn't interested in her excuses, wasn't interested in whatever pathetic justification she would try to spin. You have 1 hour to pack your things and get out of my house. Her eyes widened, her breath hitching in her throat, her entire world collapsing around her in real time. She stammered, trying to find words, trying to plead, but there was nothing left to say. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away for this. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving her in the mess she had created. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't something to be salvaged. This was the end. I walked out of that bedroom without looking back, without giving Emily a chance to plead, explain, or manipulate her way out of the inevitable. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, and there was no second-guessing. I had spent too long ignoring the signs, too long believing in a woman who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Now, the only thing left to do was wipe her from my life completely. The silence in the house felt different now, heavy, suffocating. I could hear the rustling of sheets behind me, hurried movements as Emily scrambled to gather herself, her lover still frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. He must have finally realized he wasn't just in another man's home. He was in the middle of a disaster he had willingly helped create. But he wasn't my concern. He was nothing. My focus was on making sure Emily knew that her time here was over. I walked to the living room, pulling out my phone, opening the folder where I had saved the footage. A deep satisfaction settled over me as I looked at the evidence, undeniable proof of her betrayal. There would be no gaslighting, no rewriting history, no pathetic attempt to turn this around on me. When she finally stepped into the room, wrapped in nothing but a sheet, her face was a mask of desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking, but I didn't let her continue. I turned my phone toward her, pressing play again, letting the sound of her own betrayal fill the space between us. Her face crumpled as she shook her head, covering her mouth with one trembling hand, as if hearing it outside the moment made it worse. Maybe it did. Maybe for the first time, she had to see herself for what she really was. But I didn't care. "You have 50 minutes left," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, staring at the clock on the wall. "Pack whatever you need. After that, you're gone, and I don't care where you go." Her mouth opened again, searching for words, maybe hoping that the woman she had been before, the loving wife, the devoted mother, could still reach me. But that woman didn't exist anymore. She had died the moment she invited another man into my home, into our bed. I turned away from her, grabbing a trash bag from the kitchen and walking straight to the bedroom, pulling open her closet without hesitation. I grabbed fistfuls of her clothes, shoving them into the bag without care. Expensive dresses, sentimental keepsakes, all of it meant nothing now. I heard her footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant, like she was afraid to get too close. "You don't have to do this," she finally whispered. But the audacity of those words made me laugh. I didn't have to do this? As if she hadn't been the one who had made this choice. As if she hadn't spent God knows how long sneaking around, lying straight to my face, bringing another man into our home. I turned to her then, finally looking her in the eye, and whatever she saw in my expression made her flinch. "No, you didn't have to do this," I said, my voice sharp, final. "But you did. And now you're going to live with the consequences." I didn't give her a chance to reply. I continued pulling clothes from hangers, shoving them into the bag without care. I wanted every trace of her gone, every reminder of her existence out of this house. I grabbed her vanity items next, knocking them into the bag with loud clatters, watching as bottles of perfume and makeup tumbled together in a mess. She had no right to stand in my home looking at me like I was the one destroying something. From the corner of my eye, I saw the other man, half-dressed, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He was gripping his shoes in one hand, his shirt in the other, watching us like he wasn't sure if he should speak. The sight of him disgusted me. "You," I said, turning toward him with barely controlled rage. "Get the F***K out of my house. Now." He hesitated, his gaze flicking to Emily as if she could somehow save him from this. But she said nothing. She was too busy drowning in her own guilt, too busy realizing she had lost everything. "Good. Let her feel it." He muttered something under his breath, something pathetic that I didn't care to hear, and then bolted for the door, nearly tripping over himself in his rush to leave. Emily stood there, watching him go, her lips trembling, her eyes red with unshed tears. But no amount of tears would change the outcome. The moment he walked out of that door, she finally seemed to understand what was happening, that this was real, that I wasn't bluffing. "Where am I supposed to go?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I almost laughed again. It wasn't my problem. It never would be again. Not my concern, I said simply. I tossed the trash bag filled with her things toward her feet and pointed at the clock. You have 30 minutes. I didn't stay to watch her cry. I didn't stay to hear whatever excuse she had prepared, whatever half-hearted apology she had rehearsed in her head. I walked out of the room, out of our room, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The house had never felt so hollow. The weight of betrayal still clung to the air, thick and suffocating. But beneath it, there was something else, clarity. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I saw everything for what it really was. There was no marriage to save, no love worth fighting for. Emily had already made her choice long before I walked in on her. Now, it was my turn to make mine. I didn't stay to watch her pack. I didn't care where she went, who she called, or how she planned to spin this. The second I heard her soft sobs coming from the bedroom, I walked straight to Jason's room, my mind already shifting to what really mattered. His things were untouched, his bed still neatly made from the morning, his small world blissfully unaware of the storm that had ripped through the rest of the house. He didn't know yet, but he would. The thought of telling him made my stomach twist, but what choice did I have? I had spent so much time focused on uncovering the truth that I hadn't thought about the damage it would leave in its wake. This wasn't just my betrayal to process. Jason was going to lose his mother as he knew her, and it was my responsibility to make sure he came out of this with as little pain as possible. I heard the bedroom door creak open, followed by the shuffling of footsteps down the hall. Emily emerged, her face streaked with tears, her body wrapped in the same robe she had thrown on in a hurry. She wasn't carrying any bags yet, probably still hoping I would change my mind. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small, weak. I didn't even acknowledge her. I walked right past her, through the front door, needing air, needing space. The evening was quiet, the suburban calm mocking the chaos inside my home. I sat on the porch steps, breathing deeply, trying to drown out the sound of my own anger. Then, a voice broke the silence. "Dad?" I turned sharply, and there he was, Jason, standing at the end of the driveway, holding his backpack, his face shadowed in the dim glow of the streetlights. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. His friend's parents had agreed to keep him overnight, but something must have changed. For a moment, I didn't move. I had been so focused on controlling the situation, on making sure everything was handled before Jason came back, and yet here he was, right in the middle of it. My mind raced, trying to find a way to shield him from this. But then I saw the way his eyes flicked toward the house, the way his expression shifted from confusion to something worse. I followed his gaze. The front door was still wide open. Emily stood frozen in the entryway, her tear-streaked face exposed in the porch light, her bare legs visible beneath her robe. And just beyond her, in the dimly lit hallway, Jason's young, sharp eyes landed on something he wasn't meant to see. The stranger's shoes, still abandoned near the bedroom door. It only took him a second to understand. He didn't need an explanation. He didn't need a dramatic confession. He saw the evidence with his own eyes, and just like that, the illusion of his mother shattered. A deep, horrible silence settled between us. Jason looked at me, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. I saw the betrayal hit him in real time, the way his lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. He turned back toward Emily, and for the first time in his life, he looked at her not as his mother, but as a stranger. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Baby, don't," he cut her off, his voice flat, cold in a way that a 10-year-old shouldn't be. Emily flinched. Jason turned back to me. "I want to stay with you." My heart ached for him, but I nodded. "You will." Emily took another shaky step forward. "Jason, honey, please. We need to." "I don't want to talk to you," he snapped, his voice cracking, but his anger was real. She started crying again, but this time, it wasn't just guilt. It was the realization that she had lost more than just her husband. She had lost her son. I walked over to Jason, placing a steady hand on his shoulder, feeling how tense he was, how hard he was gripping his backpack. "Come on," I said quietly. Let's go inside. Without another glance at his mother, Jason walked past her, stepping into the house where his childhood had been safe. Until tonight. I followed him, and without hesitation, I grabbed the door and slammed it shut, locking her out of the life she had destroyed. The slam of the door echoed through the house, final and absolute. For the first time since this nightmare began, Emily was on the outside looking in, exactly where she belonged. I didn't need to see her reaction to know she was crumbling. I didn't care. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Inside, Jason stood in the hallway, his small frame rigid, his fists still clenched around the straps of his backpack. His breathing was uneven, his jaw tight, his young mind struggling to process the betrayal he had just witnessed. I had spent days, weeks, planning how I would confront Emily, how I would expose her, how I would rip her out of my life. But I had never imagined that Jason would be the one to see it firsthand. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to push my own anger aside. Right now, he needed a father, not a man consumed by revenge. "Come sit down," I said, guiding him toward the couch. He didn't resist, but he didn't speak either. His eyes were hollow, staring at nothing, and I knew that look too well. It was the look of someone realizing that the world they thought they knew was nothing but a lie. I sat beside him, keeping some distance, giving him room to breathe. Minutes passed in silence, the weight of the night settling over us like a thick fog. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Who was that man?" I had two choices: lie to protect him, or tell him the truth and let him process it now rather than later. I chose the latter. "Someone your mother let into our home," I said, my voice controlled but firm. "Someone she had no business being with." Jason nodded slowly, as if he had already known the answer before he even asked. He swallowed hard, his small hands gripping his knees. "She was cheating on you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, cold and factual. I exhaled, my chest heavy. "Yes." Another long silence stretched between us. He blinked a few times, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then, with a quiet intensity that no child should ever have to feel, he looked at me and said, "I don't want to see her." The words hit me harder than I expected. He didn't cry, didn't yell. He just sat there, his decision made, his innocence shattered. I had spent days planning how I would throw Emily out, how I would strip her of everything she had taken for granted, but I had never considered that Jason might do it for me. "Okay," I said finally. "You don't have to." He nodded again, but his eyes were still dark, troubled. "Does she even love us?" The question nearly broke me. I wanted to lie, wanted to tell him that she did, that she had just made a mistake, that this didn't mean she didn't care. But I couldn't, because love wasn't just words. Love was actions. And Emily's actions had proven that whatever love she once had for us had been discarded the moment she let another man into our home. "I don't know," I admitted, the truth heavy on my tongue. "But we love each other. That's what matters now." Jason inhaled deeply, his small shoulders rising and falling. He nodded once more, his mind still racing, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he stood up and headed toward his room. "I'm tired," he mumbled. I didn't stop him. I watched as he disappeared down the hall, closing his door softly behind him. The weight of the night pressed harder against me. I had spent so much time focusing on my own pain, my own betrayal, that I hadn't fully realized how much of this would bleed into Jason's life. Emily hadn't just destroyed our marriage. She had destroyed her relationship with her son, and that was something she would never be able to fix. With exhaustion settling in, I walked to the front door, peering through the peephole. Emily was gone. Maybe she had finally realized there was nothing left to fight for, or maybe she had just retreated to lick her wounds. It didn't matter. She had been erased from this home, from this life. Now, all that was left was to ensure she never found her way back. The morning after felt different. The house was quieter, the air somehow cleaner, as if Emily's very presence had left behind a poison that was now beginning to fade. I woke up early, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Jason's bedroom door remained shut. I knew he wasn't asleep. He was awake, just like I had been, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in his head. I wanted to check on him, to tell him that things would be okay, but I knew better. He needed time. I had no idea how deeply last night had cut into him, but I knew it was a wound that wouldn't heal overnight. My own emotions were different now, more settled, more controlled. The rage that had fueled me for weeks had dulled into something colder, resolve. I had thrown Emily out, but that wasn't enough. It wasn't just about removing her physically. I needed her gone in every way possible. I needed to erase her from this house, from our lives, from everything she had touched and tainted with her betrayal. I started with the bedroom. I hadn't slept there last night, choosing instead to stay in the guest room, but now I forced myself to step inside. The bed was still a mess from where she had been with him, the sheets tangled, the pillows displaced. It disgusted me. I tore them off the mattress without a second thought, yanking off every last trace of fabric she had laid on. The pillows followed, then the blankets. I shoved them all into a trash bag, knotting it tightly, vowing that they would never again be in this house. Next came her closet. I had already packed some of her things last night, but now I finished the job. Every last piece of clothing, every forgotten shoe, every meaningless accessory she had left behind. I grabbed it all, shoving it into another bag. Her jewelry box, filled with trinkets I had given her over the years, sat untouched on the dresser. I picked it up, stared at it for a moment, then dropped it into the bag without hesitation. I moved through the rest of the house like a man possessed. The framed wedding photo on the living room shelf? Gone. Her books lining the hallway? Gone. The little decorative pieces she had picked out, the scented candle she always kept in the bathroom, even her damn coffee mug sitting by the sink. Gone, gone, gone. By the time I was done, there was nothing left of her. Nothing that carried her scent, her touch, or her presence. It was as if she had never lived here at all. Jason emerged from his room just as I was tying up the last bag. He stood in the hallway, watching me, his expression unreadable. He saw the piles of black trash bags stacked by the door, the stripped-down bed, the empty spaces where her things had once been. "Good," he said simply, then turned and walked into the kitchen. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't relief, not exactly. There was nothing about this situation that felt good. But I knew then that I was doing the right thing, that Jason needed this just as much as I did. I spent the next few hours making sure she wouldn't come back. I changed the locks first, replacing every keyhole, every code she had access to. I called my lawyer next, ensuring that everything was in place to keep her out legally. She had nowhere to go, no way to claim anything, no excuse to try and wedge herself back into this life. When I finally stepped outside, carrying the trash bags to the curb, I saw her car parked at the end of the street. She was watching, waiting, hoping for something, though I wasn't sure what. Maybe she wanted to talk, maybe she wanted forgiveness, or maybe she was just struggling to accept that the home she had once belonged to no longer had a place for her. I met her gaze for a brief moment. Then, without a word, I turned away, dropped the bags onto the pavement, and walked back inside. She was nothing now, just another mistake to be thrown away. By the time night fell, the house finally felt like mine again. The air was lighter, the silence no longer suffocating. Every trace of Emily had been erased. Every object she had once touched had been removed, and the locks had been changed so she could never step foot in here again. She was gone in every way that mattered. Jason stayed quiet for most of the day, keeping to himself, processing everything in his own way. I didn't push him to talk. I knew the weight of betrayal had settled into him, just as it had settled into me. He had lost something too, not just the mother he had known, but the version of her that had existed in his mind, the one he had believed in before last night. That kind of loss doesn't heal quickly. I made dinner for us, simple and quiet. He ate in silence, staring at his plate, his mind elsewhere. Then, halfway through, he put his fork down and looked at me with an expression too serious for a boy his age. "Is she ever coming back?" he asked. I met his gaze, steady and firm. "No." He nodded, pushing his food around with his fork. "Good." There was nothing else to say. That night, after Jason went to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the blank space on the mantel where our wedding photo had once been. There had been a time when I had looked at that picture and felt pride, love, certainty in the woman beside me. Now, it was just a painful reminder of how blind I had been. Emily had tried to call several times throughout the day, but I ignored every attempt. She had texted too, long, desperate messages filled with apologies, explanations, and pleas for another chance. She begged to talk, to see Jason, to fix things. But there was nothing left to fix. Late into the night, my phone buzzed again. Another message from her. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally opening it. Emily, I know I made a mistake. I know I hurt you. But please, don't shut me out of Jason's life. He's my son too. For the first time since this all began, I felt something other than anger. I felt pity. Not for her, but for what she had lost. She hadn't just thrown away our marriage. She had thrown away her relationship with her son, the only person in the world who had ever truly needed her. I typed a response, short and final. Me, you threw yourself out of his life. Not me. Then, I blocked her number. I sat there for a long time, letting the finality of it sink in. This was the end of us, the true end. Not with a fight, not with screaming, not with some grand, dramatic moment. Just silence. Cold, irreversible silence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.